The twin suns of Solvara were setting when Nix Valerian first heard the child crying. He'd been nursing a cup of bitter thrall at a corner vendor stall, watching the marketplace thin as merchants packed away their wares for the evening. The port city of Tessalon was known for three things: its neutral stance in galactic conflicts, its willingness to trade with anyone who had credits, and its complete indifference to the troubles of strangers. All three qualities had made it the perfect place for a man trying to disappear. Nix had been on Solvara for 6 days. 6 days of keeping his head down, eating bland food, and waiting for a transport captain desperate or foolish enough to take on a passenger with no questions asked. His ship had been destroyed 3 weeks ago in a skirmish he'd had no business being part of, and he was running out of money and patience in equal measure. The crying grew louder. He told himself it wasn't his problem. Children cried all the time in every corner of the galaxy. Their parents would come. Someone would handle it. He'd spent the last 5 years handling everyone else's problems, and where had it gotten him? Alone, broke, and hiding on a backwater world where the air smelled like sulfur and the locals had scales instead of skin. But the crying didn't stop, with a curse that would have made his former squad laugh. Nix abandoned his drink and followed the sound. The marketplace was a maze of narrow alleys between permanent structures and temporary stalls. Most vendors had already left, leaving behind the detritus of a day's commerce. Empty crates, scattered fabric, the lingering scent of exotic spices that made his nose itch. He found them behind a stack of cargo containers. 2 children, small even by the standards of the Solvari people. Their scales were a deep emerald green that seemed to shimmer in the fading light, and their large amber eyes were wet with tears. The older one had his arms wrapped protectively around the younger, who was sobbing into his shoulder with the kind of heartbreak that transcended species. "Hey," Nix said softly, crouching down to their level. "You two okay?" The older boy's head snapped up, and for a moment Nix thought he might run. But instead, those amber eyes studied him with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. "You're human," the boy said. It wasn't a question. Guilty as charged. "I'm Nix. What are your names?" "Kale," the boy said after a hesitation. He gestured to his brother. "This is Torin. He's scared." "Of what?" "The dark. The crowds. The ... Kale's voice dropped to a whisper. "The people who want to hurt us." Every instinct Nix had honed over years of combat screamed at him to walk away. These weren't just random children. The quality of their clothing, the way Kale spoke, the elaborate patterns etched into their scales, these were children of privilege. Possibly nobility. Definitely trouble. "Where are your parents?" He asked instead. "Mother is ... Kale hesitated, glancing at his brother. "Busy. She's always busy. We just wanted to explore, but then everyone started looking at us strangely, and Torin got frightened, and I couldn't remember the way back, and—" "Breathe," Nix interrupted gently. "It's okay. We'll figure it out." Torin lifted his head from his brother's shoulder, his amber eyes fixing on Nix with sudden hope. "You'll help us?" "I'll help you." The words came out before Nix could stop them, and he immediately regretted the promise. But something in those children's faces called to a part of himself he'd thought was long dead, the part that still believed in protecting the innocent, in standing between the vulnerable and the dark. "Thank you," Kale whispered, and the relief in his voice was almost painful to hear. They talked as the sun sank below the horizon and Tessalon's artificial lights flickered to life. Nix learned that the boys had slipped away from their guards during an official visit to the marketplace. They'd meant to be gone for only a few minutes, just long enough to see the exotic vendors their tutors were always describing. But minutes had turned to hours, and now they were hopelessly lost in a city that grew more dangerous after dark. "We should find those guards of yours," Nix said, though the thought of dealing with royal security made his stomach tighten. They must be looking for you. They'll be angry, Torrin said quietly. Better angry than worried. But when Nix stood and offered his hands to help the boys up, Torrin suddenly lunged forward and wrapped his small arms around Nix's waist. The hug was desperate, clinging, and completely unexpected. Please don't leave us, the younger prince whispered. You feel ... safe. Kale was watching him with those two knowing eyes. You've protected people before. Children, I can tell. Nix felt something crack inside his chest. Yeah, he admitted quietly. I have. Will you protect us? Just until we get home? He should have said no. Should have put distance between himself and whatever political firestorm these children represented. But Torrin was still clinging to him, and Kale was looking at him with such hope. And Nix had been running for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed. Just until you get home, he agreed. They settled in to wait near the cargo containers. Nix positioning himself where he could watch the approaches while keeping the boys shielded. Torrin refused to let go, eventually curling up against Nix's side with his head on the human's lap. Kale sat nearby, his hand resting on his brother's back, amber eyes scanning the shadows with a wariness that no child should possess. Tell us a story, Torrin murmured sleepily. I don't know any stories. Everyone knows stories, Kale countered. Tell us about Earth, about your home. So Nix talked. He told them about blue skies and oceans that stretched to the horizon, about forests where the trees grew so tall they seemed to touch the clouds, about snow and rain and the simple pleasure of grass between your toes. His voice was rough from disuse, but the boys listened with rapt attention, their amber eyes growing heavy as exhaustion claimed them. Torrin fell asleep first, his breathing evening out into the soft rhythm of childhood dreams. Kale lasted longer, fighting to stay awake, as if afraid that closing his eyes might make this moment disappear. But eventually he too surrendered, curling up on Nix's other side with his brother. Nix sat in the darkness, two alien princes sleeping peacefully against him, and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. He didn't have to wonder long. The sound of boots on stone echoed through the marketplace, many boots, moving with military precision. Lights swept through the alleys, searching, and voices called out in the harsh, clicking language of the Solvari people. Nix tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife hidden in his boot, but he forced himself to remain still. Running would only make things worse. The lights found them. 6 figures emerged from the darkness, tall and imposing in crystalline armor that caught the artificial light like captured rainbows. Their scales were a darker green and the prince's nearly black, and their amber eyes held the cold assessment of professional soldiers. Each carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. The leader stepped forward, his hand on his weapon, but not yet drawing it. Step away from the princes, he commanded in heavily accented standard. Slowly. They're asleep, Nix said quietly, careful not to make any sudden movements. If I move, I'll wake them. That is not my concern, human. It should be. The guard's eyes narrowed dangerously. You dare? Captain Dravos. Kale's voice cut through the tension, sleepy but clear. Stand down. This human protected us. He is not a threat. Dravos looked torn between relief at finding the princes alive and fury at finding them with an unknown alien. Your Highness, we must return you to Her Majesty immediately. She is concerned. Concerned is a gentle word for what mother will be, Kale muttered, carefully extracting himself from Nix's side without waking his brother. But this human helped us when we were lost and frightened. He deserves our gratitude, not threats. That is not for me to decide, Your Highness. Nix gently lifted Torrin, cradling the still sleeping child against his chest. The younger prince. made a small sound of protest, but didn't wake, his small hand fisting in Nix's shirt. "Then let's go meet your mother," Nix said, meeting Dravis's hostile gaze with calm acceptance. "I'm sure she want to hear what happened." The walk through Tessalon's streets was surreal. Citizens who'd been hurrying home stopped to stare as the royal guard escorted a human carrying one prince while the other walked freely at his side. Whispers followed them like smoke, and Nix could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes tracking their progress. Kale stayed close to him, ignoring the guards who clearly wanted to separate them. "Mother will be intense," the prince warned quietly. "She loves us very much, but she expresses it through anger when she's frightened. Most mothers do. She commands 20 star systems and has won 14 wars through personal combat. So, a little more intense than most mothers." Kale's laugh was surprising and genuine. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Nix Valerian. In my experience, there's not much difference between the two." The palace rose before them like a living thing, all organic curves and bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with what Nix could only assume was some kind of emotional resonance. It was beautiful and alien, and slightly intimidating, much like the world itself. They passed through security checkpoints where guards scanned him with devices that made his skin tingle. Through corridors where servants stopped their work to stare. Through chambers that spoke of wealth and power accumulated over generations. And with every step, Nix felt the weight of his decision settling more firmly on his shoulders. This was a mistake. These children were so far above his station, so far removed from his world, that even being in their presence felt like a transgression. But Torin was still sleeping peacefully against his chest, and Kale was still walking at his side with complete trust, and Nix couldn't bring himself to regret the choice that had led him here. The throne room doors opened with a sound like thunder. Queen Ashara stood in the center of a space designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. But Nix barely registered the architecture. His entire attention was fixed on the woman before him. She was magnificent, not taller than her guards. Her scales a deep emerald that seemed to hold the light of distant stars. Intricate patterns covered her visible skin, telling stories in a language Nix couldn't read. Her amber eyes, so like her son's, but infinitely more intense, fixed on him with an expression that promised violence and demanded answers in equal measure. But it was the rage and relief warring in those eyes that told Nix everything he needed to know about Queen Ashara. She was a mother first, a queen second, and the terror of nearly losing her children had stripped away every layer of diplomatic polish. "Who?" she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself vibrate. "Are you? And why are my sons sleeping on your chest?" The silence that followed Queen Ashara's question felt heavy enough to crush stone. Every courtier in the throne room seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see how the human would respond to their sovereign's barely contained fury. Nix could feel the weight of their stares, the judgment in their amber eyes, the assumption that he was something dangerous that had infiltrated their world. He met the queen's gaze without flinching. "My name is Nix Valerian, and they're sleeping on my chest because they were scared, alone, and needed someone to tell them they were safe." A muscle twitched in Ashara's jaw, the only sign of the emotions roiling beneath her controlled exterior. She took a step forward, her scaled hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. "You speak of my sons as if they were common street urchins. They are princes of the Solvari Empire, heirs to a legacy that spans millennia. Last night, they were just 2 frightened children who couldn't find their way home." The audacity of his response sent a ripple of shock through the assembled court. Several guards moved forward, hands on their weapons, but Ashara raised one hand to stop them. Her eyes never left Nix's face, studying him with an intensity that felt like being dissected. "Mother," Kale spoke up, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "Please don't be angry with Nix. We ran away. It was our fault, not his. You ran away? Ashara's attention snapped to her eldest son, and for the first time, Nix saw something other than royal composure in her expression. He saw fear. Kale, you know the dangers. We know, Kale interrupted, something desperate in his voice. We know about the assassination attempts. We know about the rival factions. We know that every time we leave the palace, we put ourselves at risk. But Mother, we're so tired of being afraid all the time. We just wanted one moment where we could be ... normal. Ashara's expression cracked just for a heartbeat, and Nix saw the woman beneath the crown. Saw a mother who was terrified of failing to protect what she loved most. Then the mask slammed back into place, but something in her eyes had softened. And you, she said, turning back to Nix. You just happened to find them? I heard crying. I followed it. That's all. That's all, Ashara repeated, disbelief coloring her harmonics. A human soldier, yes. I can see what you are by how you stand. How your eyes track every exit just happens upon the crown princes of Solvara and decides to help them out of the goodness of his heart. Would you prefer I'd left them there? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Captain Dravos made a strangled sound of outrage at the human's continued audacity, but Ashara's expression shifted into something that might have been grudging respect. No, she admitted quietly. I would not prefer that. Torin chose that moment to wake, his amber eyes blinking open slowly. He looked around the throne room with sleepy confusion before his gaze found his mother. Mama, he said, his voice small and uncertain. Are you angry? The transformation in Queen Ashara was instantaneous. All the fury and fear melted away, replaced by maternal concern so fierce it was almost painful to witness. She crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, reaching for her younger son. But Torin's arms tightened around Nix's neck. Don't want to let go, he mumbled. He's warm and safe, and he smells like home. Ashara froze, her hands hovering in the air. Hurt flashed across her face before she could hide it. Torin, darling, I'm right here. I know, Mama, but ... Torin turned his face into Nix's shoulder, as if seeking comfort from a source he couldn't articulate. It's different. Nix felt profoundly uncomfortable being caught in what was clearly a deeply personal family moment. Hey, buddy, he said softly. Your mom's been worried sick about you. Give her a hug, yeah? Slowly, reluctantly, Torin unwound his arms and allowed his mother to take him. Ashara held her son like he was made of starlight and wishes, her face buried in his hair, her shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. When she finally looked up, her amber eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you, she said to Nix, and the words seemed to cost her something. For keeping them safe. Anyone would have... No, Ashara cut him off firmly. Not anyone. Most would have seen an opportunity. Royal hostages are worth fortunes to the right buyers. You saw children in need, and you helped them. That is not as common as you seem to think. Before Nix could respond, a new voice cut through the throne room. Well, this is certainly the most interesting diplomatic incident we've had in years. A Solvari woman glided into the chamber with the kind of grace that spoke of high breeding and extensive training. She was slightly shorter than Ashara, her scales a lighter shade of green with silver patterns that caught the light like morning frost. Her amber eyes sparkled with intelligence and barely suppressed amusement. Cerise, Ashara said, relief evident in her voice. I'm glad you're here. Wouldn't miss this for all the trade agreements in the sector. Cerise approached Nix with open curiosity, circling him like an artist examining a particularly interesting sculpture. So you're the human who's caused such a stir. My sister has sent out 17 emergency security alerts in the past 3 hours. The entire capital has been searching for these 2 troublemakers. I apologize for the inconvenience, Nick said dryly. Cerise laughed, the sound like wind chimes in a summer breeze. Oh, I like him. Ashara, can we keep him? He's not a pet, Cerise. Obviously not. Pets are usually better behaved. She stopped directly in front of Nix, studying his face with unnerving intensity. You're running from something. I can see it in your eyes. What are you running from, Nix Valerian? My past, aren't we all? Cerise turned to her sister. He's perfect. Ashara's expression shifted to confusion. Perfect for what? For the boys, obviously. They need someone who isn't terrified of you. Someone who sees them as children first and princes second. Someone who, she gestured at Nix, they've already decided to trust completely, apparently. You're suggesting I hire a complete stranger as... What? A guardian for my sons? I'm suggesting you recognize an opportunity when the universe drops it in your lap. Cerise moved to stand beside her sister, her voice dropping to a lower register that still carried clearly through the chamber. Ashara, look at them. When's the last time either boy slept so peacefully? When's the last time Torrin wasn't checking over his shoulder for threats? When's the last time Kale looked at someone new without suspicion? Ashara's gaze moved to her sons. Kale was standing close to Nix's side, not quite touching, but clearly comfortable in his presence. Torrin had his face pressed against her shoulder, but his hand was stretched out toward the human, as if maintaining a physical connection. It's madness, Ashara said, but her voice lacked conviction. Most of the best things are. A commotion at the throne room entrance interrupted their conversation. A portly Solvari male burst through the doors, his expensive robes disheveled, and his scales flushed with a darker color that indicated agitation. Several guards tried to stop him, but he brushed them aside with the authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. Your Majesty, the newcomer gasped, out of breath. I came as soon as I heard about the ... incident. I must protest this human's presence in the palace. The security risk alone, Regent Malther, Ashara's voice could have frozen stars. This is neither the time nor the place. With respect, Your Majesty, when is the appropriate time to discuss the fact that an unknown alien was found with the crown princes? Malther's small eyes fixed on Nix with undisguised hostility. We know nothing about this human. His background, his intentions, his connections. For all we know, he orchestrated this entire situation. That's ridiculous, Kale said hotly. Nix didn't know who we were. So he claims, Malther countered. But how convenient that a human soldier just happens to be in the right place at the right time. How convenient that he's now positioned himself as a hero to the royal family. Nix felt his jaw tighten. He dealt with men like Malther throughout the galaxy, politicians who saw conspiracies in every shadow and opportunity in every crisis. If I'd wanted to kidnap them, I had hours to do it. If I'd wanted to hurt them, they'd be hurt. If I'd wanted to use them, I'd have contacted whoever's paying for information about the royal family. I did none of those things. I helped 2 scared kids and brought them home. How noble, Malther said with evident sarcasm. And I'm sure you expect no reward for this heroism? I expect to leave this planet as soon as I can find transport. That's all I've ever wanted. Something flickered across Ashara's face, an emotion too quick to identify. What if I asked you to stay? The throne room went utterly silent. Nix stared at the Queen, certain he'd misheard. What? My sister makes a valid point, loath as I am to admit it. My sons have connected with you in a way they haven't with anyone outside the family. Ashara's voice was carefully neutral, but her eyes held a complexity of emotions. I'm told you're looking for transport off-world. That suggests you're without employment or permanent residence. I'm between opportunities, Nix said carefully. I'm offering you one. Stay in the palace as a companion to my sons. Someone they can talk to, someone they can trust, someone who isn't bound by the same protocols and formalities that govern everyone else in their lives. You're offering me a job babysitting? A smile ghosted across Ashara's lips. I'm offering you a chance to stop running. Room, board, security, and a salary generous enough to eventually book passage anywhere in the galaxy you'd like to go. In exchange, you give my sons what they clearly need: normalcy. This is highly irregular, Your Majesty, Captain Dravos protested. We haven't even completed a background check. Then complete one. Thoroughly. Ashara's attention never left Nix's face. But something tells me we won't find anything that changes my mind. She was right, and Nix knew it. His record was clean technically. The operations he'd been part of had all been sanctioned, even if they'd been morally gray. The enemies he'd made were scattered across the galaxy, unlikely to track him here. And the ghosts he carried were his own, not a threat to anyone but himself. He should refuse. Should walk away from this entire situation before it got more complicated. But Kale was watching him with barely concealed hope, and Torin had started crying softly against his mother's shoulder. And something in Ashara's eyes was asking a question that had nothing to do with job duties and compensation. How long? Nix asked. As long as it works. For any of us. And if it doesn't work, then you leave with enough credits to go wherever you wish. And we part as friends. Ashara shifted Torin in her arms, moving closer to Nix, close enough that he could see the individual scales on her face, the flecks of gold in her amber eyes, the faint scars that marked her as a warrior despite her royal bearing. I'm not asking you to swear fealty or bind yourself permanently. I'm asking you to give my sons, and perhaps all of us, a chance to see what this could be. There was something in her voice, something vulnerable beneath the regal authority, something that suggested this offer meant more than a simple employment arrangement. Okay, Nix heard himself say. I'll stay. For a while. Kale let out a whoop of joy that was decidedly unprince-like. Torin stopped crying and lifted his head, his amber eyes wide with disbelief. Really? You'll really stay? Really? Cerise was grinning like she'd just won a significant bet. Captain Dravos looked like he wanted to object, but couldn't find appropriate grounds. And Regent Malther's expression suggested he was already planning how to use this development to his advantage. But Nix only had eyes for Queen Ashara, who was looking at him with an expression that made something in his chest tighten uncomfortably. Gratitude, yes. Relief, certainly. But beneath those, something else. Something that felt dangerous and intoxicating in equal measure. Thank you, she said softly, and the harmonics in her voice resonated through him like a physical touch. Don't thank me yet, Nix replied. You might regret this decision. I rarely regret anything, Nix Valerian. It's one of the privileges of being queen. Later, as servants showed him to quarters that were larger than any dwelling he'd ever owned, Nix stood at the window overlooking Tessalon and wondered what he'd gotten himself into. The city sprawled below him, its bioluminescent lights painting the darkness in shades of blue and green and gold. Somewhere in this palace were two young princes who'd decided he was worth trusting. Somewhere was a queen who'd offered him sanctuary for reasons he didn't fully understand. And somewhere he was certain were people who would see his presence as a threat or an opportunity. His old squad letter used to say that the universe had a sense of humor. Nix was beginning to think the old bastard had been right. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. When he opened the door, he found Cerise standing in the corridor, a knowing smile on her face. Getting settled? She asked, trying to figure out what just happened. You became part of something bigger than yourself. It's terrifying, I know. She leaned against the doorframe, her casual posture at odds with the intensity in her eyes. Can I give you some advice? Can I stop you? Not really. Here it is. My sister is the strongest person I know. She's conquered star systems and negotiated treaties that reshaped this part of the galaxy. But her sons are her weakness and her strength. She would burn entire worlds to keep them safe. I'm not a threat to them. I know. But you might be a threat to her. Cerise's smile turned enigmatic. And that might be exactly what she needs. Before Nyx could ask what she meant, Cerise pushed off the doorframe and glided away down the corridor, leaving him with more questions than answers. Through the window, Solvara's twin moons rose over the city, casting silver light across alien architecture. And Nyx Valerian, who'd been running from his past for 5 long years, found himself standing still for the first time in memory, wondering if maybe, just maybe, he'd found something worth staying for. 3 weeks passed in the palace like a dream wrapped in routine. Nyx fell into the rhythms of his new life with surprising ease. Mornings were spent in the palace gardens with Kale and Torin, where he taught them things the royal tutors never would: how to read the weather by watching birds, how to move quietly through undergrowth, how to find north by the stars. The boys absorbed everything with hungry curiosity, their laughter echoing through spaces that had been too quiet for too long. Afternoons brought lessons in the palace library, where ancient texts lined walls that stretched toward vaulted ceilings. Nyx would sit with the princes while their tutors droned on about history and mathematics and diplomatic protocol. He wasn't expected to participate, but often found himself drawn into debates about military strategy or cultural differences between species. More than once, he caught Queen Ashara watching from the doorway, her expression unreadable. Evenings were his favorite. After formal dinners that he still found painfully uncomfortable, he'd retreat with the boys to their chambers and tell them stories until they fell asleep. Stories about Earth and the worlds he'd seen, about people he'd known and battles he'd survived. He edited out the worst parts, the truly dark moments. But the princes seemed to understand that his tales came from a place of hard-earned experience. And through it all, Queen Ashara orbited his existence like a distant star present but untouchable. Warm but carefully distant, she watched him with her sons, observed how Torin's nightmares had diminished, how Kale smiled more freely. She asked questions during their occasional encounters in the palace corridors, learning about his past in careful increments. She never pushed, never demanded, but Nyx felt the weight of her attention, like sunlight on his skin. He told himself it meant nothing. She was a queen. He was a soldier. She ruled star systems. He couldn't even maintain a permanent address. The gulf between them was insurmountable, and any attraction he felt, and he definitely felt it, was simply the product of proximity and circumstance. But then she'd smile at something he said, or their fingers would brush accidentally when both reached for the same datapad, and his carefully constructed rationality would crumble like sand castles before a tide. Captain Dravos watched these interactions with barely concealed suspicion. The security chief had completed his background check and found nothing actionable, but that hadn't softened his distrust. He saw Nyx as an unknown variable in an equation that had to equal the prince's absolute safety. Cerise, on the other hand, found the entire situation endlessly entertaining. She'd taken to inviting Nyx to court functions just to watch him squirm through formal protocols, then laughing at his discomfort with undisguised delight. "You're good for this place," she'd told him once. "Everyone's so busy being proper that they've forgotten how to be real." But it was Regent Malther who represented the real danger, though it took Nyx time to recognize it. The portly politician had a gift for appearing at inopportune moments, always with questions that seemed innocent but carried barbs beneath the surface. He asked about Nyx's military service, his travels, his opinions on interspecies politics. He smiled and nodded and made notes on his ever-present datapad, and he watched, always watching. "I don't trust him. Nix told Cerise during one of their conversations in the palace's upper gardens. They'd developed an unlikely friendship, the human soldier and the royal advisor, bonded by their mutual status as outsiders to the strict protocols that governed palace life. Cerise plucked a luminescent flower from a nearby bush, its petals glowing soft blue in the fading daylight. Malthur is ... complicated. He genuinely believes he's acting in the Empire's best interests. Unfortunately, his version of the Empire's best interests often aligns suspiciously well with his own advancement. He wants the throne. He wants influence over the throne, which amounts to the same thing. Cerise studied the flower, her expression thoughtful. My sister is powerful, but she's also alone. No consort since her husband died, no close advisors she truly trusts besides me and Dravos. Malthur positions himself as indispensable, the voice of the old guard, the keeper of tradition. And I threaten that position. You represent change, uncertainty, the possibility that Ashara might start trusting her own judgment over the council's recommendations. Cerise met his eyes, her amber gaze serious. Be careful, Nix. Malthur won't move against you directly. That would be too obvious. But accidents happen in palaces. People disappear. Reputations are destroyed by whispers and implications. The warning proved prescient sooner than either expected that it was Kale who brought Nix the news. Bursting into his quarters 2 nights later with fear written across his young face. Nix, you have to see this. The datapad Kale thrust at him displayed a news feed from one of the local information networks. The headline made Nix's blood run cold. Royal Companions' Dark Past, War Crimes and Civilian Casualties. The article that followed was a masterpiece of selective truth and creative omission. It detailed operations Nix had participated in during his military service, but stripped of context and twisted to paint him as a brutal mercenary who'd killed indiscriminately. Civilian deaths that had been tragic accidents in combat zones were presented as deliberate massacres. Classified missions were exposed and reframed as criminal enterprises. None of it was technically false, but none of it was truly accurate either. It's not true, Kale said fiercely. Tell me it's not true. Nix looked at the boy, this prince who'd given him trust so freely, and felt something break inside his chest. It's complicated. That's what adults say when they don't want to admit something. You're right. Nix set the datapad down, meeting Kale's amber eyes directly. I was a soldier. I did things in combat that I'm not proud of. People died because of decisions I made. But I never killed anyone who wasn't a threat, and I never harmed civilians deliberately. War it's messy and terrible, and sometimes people get hurt, even when you're trying to do the right thing. Kale was quiet for a long moment, his young face struggling with concepts that shouldn't burden someone so young. Do you regret it? Every day. The simple honesty seemed to satisfy something in the prince. He nodded slowly, then straightened his shoulders in a gesture that reminded Nix painfully of Ashara. Mother will want to see you. Malthur is already calling for your removal from the palace. Of course he was. The emergency council session was held in a chamber Nix had never entered a space, reserved for matters of state, security, and high-level political maneuvering. The room was circular, with tiered seating that focused attention on a central platform where Ashara sat in what could only be called a throne. Her ceremonial armor caught the light like captured lightning, and her expression was carved from stone. Malthur stood before her, his datapad in hand, his voice carrying the righteous indignation of someone who believed absolutely in his own moral superiority. Your Majesty, the evidence is clear. This human has concealed a violent past filled with questionable actions and civilian casualties. He poses a direct threat to the princes, and by extension, to the stability of the realm. These operations were sanctioned by his government. Ceres countered from her position at Ashara's right hand. He was following orders in active combat zones. Holding him personally responsible for every tragedy of war is. He should have disclosed this information when he accepted a position of trust with the royal family. Malthor interrupted. The fact that he concealed, it suggests consciousness of guilt, or a desire to leave his past behind, Ashara said quietly, her voice carrying despite its softness. Her amber eyes found Nyx where he stood at the edge of the circle. Is there truth to these accusations? Yes, no point in lying. I was part of those operations. People died. Not the way the article describes, but they died nonetheless. And you feel no remorse? Malthor pressed. I feel nothing but remorse. That's why I left. Ashara studied him for a long moment, and Nyx felt the weight of her judgment like a physical thing. This was the woman who'd conquered star systems and reshaped governments. This was the queen who'd spent decades making impossible decisions that affected billions of lives. If anyone could understand the burden of choices made in impossible circumstances, it should be her. A council's recommendation? Ashara asked, her gaze sweeping the assembled advisors. Remove him immediately, Malthor said without hesitation. His presence is a liability we cannot afford. Give him a chance to prove his character, Ceres countered. 3 weeks in the palace, and the princes are happier than they've been in years. That counts for something. Captain Dravos shifted uncomfortably. My investigation found no current threats associated with his presence. However, the publicity created by these revelations does pose security concerns. Ashara's fingers drummed against the arm of her throne, a small gesture that somehow conveyed vast deliberation. Nyx Valerian stepped forward. He did, moving to the center of the circle where everyone could see him, where Ashara could see him most clearly. Do my sons know about your past? She asked. They do now. And their reaction? Kale asked if I regretted it. I told him the truth, that I regret it every day. Something flickered in Ashara's eyes. The truth, she repeated. That seems to be something in short supply in palaces. Everyone tells me what they think I want to hear, or what serves their agenda, or what protects their position. But you've been honest from the beginning, haven't you? Even when honesty doesn't serve you. Lying takes too much effort, Your Majesty. A smile ghosted across her lips. Indeed. She stood, her armor shifting to accommodate the movement, its patterns pulsing with colors that Nyx had learned indicated deep thought and emotional turbulence. Regent Malthor, I appreciate your concern for the realm's security. Captain Dravos, thank you for your thorough assessment. Advisor Ceres, your counsel is always valued. She descended from the platform, moving with the grace that came from a lifetime of physical training and combat experience. When she stood directly in front of Nyx, close enough that he could see his reflection in her amber eyes, the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. My sons trust you, Ashara said quietly, though her words carried through the silent chamber. They sleep peacefully for the first time in months. They smile, they laugh, they ask questions about worlds beyond our borders. They've started to see possibilities instead of only dangers. Your Majesty, Malthor began. Ashara raised one hand, silencing him without looking away from Nyx. I've made difficult decisions throughout my reign. I've sacrificed personal happiness for political necessity. I've put the needs of billions before the needs of the few, including my own children. But standing here now, I realize I've been so focused on protecting them from external threats that I've failed to see the internal damage that constant fear and isolation has caused. She reached out slowly, giving Nyx time to pull away if he wanted. When he didn't, her scaled hand came to rest against his chest, just over his heart. The touch burned through his shirt like starfire. You've given them something I couldn't, Ashara continued, her voice dropping even lower. You've given them normalcy, safety that comes from trust rather than guards and protocols. And you've asked nothing in return except the chance to help. Ashara, Cerise said softly, and the use of her sister's given name, rather than title, spoke volumes about the significance of the moment. Are you sure? I'm never sure of anything, Ashara replied, her eyes still locked with Nyx's. But I'm certain that sending this man away would hurt my sons more than keeping him here ever could. His past is filled with pain and regret, but who among us can claim otherwise? I've commanded armies that destroyed entire populations. I've made decisions that ended millions of lives. If we judge people solely by the blood on their hands, then I'm the most dangerous person in this room. She stepped back, her hand falling away from his chest, but her gaze remaining fixed on his face. Nyx Valerian, you will remain in the palace as companion to my sons. Anyone who has a problem with this decision can bring it to me directly, and I will be happy to discuss it at length. The last words were directed at Malthor, who looked like he'd swallowed something toxic. Your Majesty, I must protest. Your protest is noted and dismissed. This session is concluded. The chamber emptied slowly, advisors and courtiers filing out with whispered conversations that would undoubtedly continue for days. Cerise paused to squeeze Nyx's shoulder in passing, her amber eyes dancing with suppressed laughter. Captain Dravos gave him a curt nod that might have been acknowledgement or warning, or both, but Ashara remained. Standing in the center of the circular chamber, with her armor pulsing patterns that Nyx didn't know how to interpret. Thank you, he said when they were finally alone. Don't thank me yet. Malthor won't let this go. He'll see it as a personal defeat, and he'll be looking for ways to undermine either your position or my judgment. Possibly both. I can handle Malthor. I know you can, but you shouldn't have to. Ashara moved to the chamber's large window, looking out over the palace grounds bathed in the light of Solvara's twin moons. I meant what I said in there. About my sons. About what you've given them. Nyx joined her at the window, maintaining a respectful distance, even though everything in him wanted to close the gap. They're good kids. They just needed someone who wasn't afraid of letting them be kids. They need more than that. They need. Ashara trailed off, her reflection in the glass showing vulnerability that her public face never revealed. I've been so focused on preparing them to rule that I forgot they need to learn how to live first. It's not too late. Isn't it? She turned to face him, and in the moonlight filtering through the window, her scales seemed to shimmer like captured starlight. I've been queen for 17 years. In that time, I've fought wars, negotiated treaties, expanded our territory, and strengthened our defenses. But I've forgotten how to be anything other than a ruler. How to be a mother. How to be... She paused, something uncertain flickering in her amber eyes. How to be a woman. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications that made Nyx's pulse quicken. Your Majesty, Ashara, she corrected softly. When we're alone, I'm just Ashara. Not a queen. Not an empress. Just a woman who's terrified of failing the people she loves most. You're not failing them. Then why do they seek comfort from a stranger instead of their own mother? The pain in her voice was almost physical. Nyx found himself moving closer without conscious decision, drawn by the vulnerability in her expression. Because you're their mother. You're the one who has to discipline them, guide them, make the hard decisions about their lives. That's a different kind of love than what I offer. They need both. Ashara looked up at him, and he realized with a start that she had to look up, that for all her height, she was still slightly shorter than him. It was a perspective he'd never had before, seeing this powerful queen from above rather than below. It made her seem more human, more real. You're very wise for a soldier, she said, a slight smile touching her lips. I'm really not. I've just made enough mistakes to recognize wisdom when I stumble across it accidentally." Her laugh was genuine and surprised, transforming her face from regal beauty to something even more captivating. "You do that, you know. Make me laugh when I least expect it. When was the last time someone did that?" "I couldn't say, Urshara." "Neither could I. That's the problem." She lifted one hand, hesitating for just a moment before placing it against his cheek. Her scales were warm, the texture more smooth than he'd expected. "You're a dangerous man, Nyx Valerian. Not because of your past, but because you make me want things I thought I'd given up forever." His breath caught. "What things?" "This." She rose onto her toes, her other hand coming up to rest against his chest again, feeling his heart hammer against his ribs. "Connection. Honesty. Someone who sees me instead of just the crown I wear." Nyx knew he should step back, should maintain the distance that protocol and common sense demanded, should remember the 100 reasons why this was a terrible idea that could only end in disaster. But her amber eyes held galaxies, and her touch burned through him like wildfire. And in that moment, he couldn't remember a single reason to deny what they both wanted. He bent his head slowly, giving her time to change her mind, to remember she was a queen and he was nobody. But instead of pulling away, Ashara closed the remaining distance between them. Their lips met like the collision of stars, explosive, transformative, inevitable. She tasted like alien spices and something sweet he couldn't name. Her scales against his skin felt like silk over steel, and her hands fisted in his shirt with surprising strength. The kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate. Two people who'd been alone for too long, finally finding connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Ashara's armor was pulsing patterns of gold and crimson that even Nyx recognized as desire and joy. "Well," she said breathlessly, her forehead resting against his. "That was ... Probably a mistake," Nyx finished, "undoubtedly." She smiled against his lips. "Shall we make it again?" They did, and somewhere in the palace, watching through security feeds he wasn't supposed to have access to, Regent Malther made notes on his datapad and began planning his next move.